and thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Melissa Kenny. I'm the Director of Research and Knowledge Initiatives and a Principal Research Scholar in Environmental Decision Support Science here at the Institute on the Environment. And it is my pleasure to welcome you here today for this People and Planet conversation. People and Planet is a public series launched as a space to have wide-ranging conversations about many intersections of climate and the human and natural systems that shape our world. Before we start, I want to begin by acknowledging that the Institute on the Environment, like the rest of the University of Minnesota's Twin Cities campus, sits on traditional and treaty land of the Dakota people, land that was taken from Native people. As a scholarly community committed to building sustainable futures, it's particularly important to acknowledge the Dakota people on whose land we live, learn, and work. We also understand that Dakota, Ojibwe, and other Indigenous knowledge systems are crucial ways of knowing. We honor the people who keep that Indigenous knowledge. Taking a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on helps us to recognize the harms and mistakes of the past and benefits that accrued to settlers, including my own ancestors. Recognizing the truth of colonization is important to healing and reconciliation, and it's needed for respectful partnerships with Indigenous people. This is ongoing work. INE commits to improving and strengthening the university's relationships with our tribal nations. So before we begin, I have just a couple of very quick logistical notes. If you have any questions for our speakers, and I know you'll have many, we've reserved some time towards the end of the conversation, and we will work to address as many as we can. Also, we're recording the conversation, and we'll share this along with other resources mentioned in a follow-up message later this week. So now I'm going to hand things to our wonderful moderator, Nina Axelson. Sorry.
Close enough.
Just making up last
Dear diary.
She's the founder of Great Catalyst, and she's going to be our facilitator and collaborator on this conversation today. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, appreciate it. So first of all, I just want to do a sound check. I have a voice that is on the louder side, but I recognize that sometimes in the back of the room. Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to encourage everyone to really project today to make sure that everybody can stay in the conversation. So as Melissa was generous enough to introduce me, I'm Nina Axelson. I'm the president and founder of Grid Catalyst. We're a clean energy and clean tech accelerator. When I first told my friends I was starting an accelerator, they thought they meant I was building something in my basement that was something very high tech and probably nuclear. What that means is I work with startups, innovators, entrepreneurs to help them get their ideas out of those basements and out into commercial application, with an emphasis on folks who already are at that prototyping demonstration pilot phase. What I deeply appreciate about the partnership with the Institute on the Environment is that when we come into these conversations like we're going to have with these great speakers today, there's an immense amount of technological opportunity out there, and it's a lot of what we talk about when we talk about what's happening with the Inflation Reduction Act, other investments that are happening, and I do love the super techie side of things. But People and Planet is a good way to frame it, because we can't do any of this without the people, and at the end of the day, what we're usually thinking about is how does this bring solutions to people and to community. And so I think that that's a wonderful framing from the Institute, and appreciate them hosting us today. So I'm going to try and cut myself off short here, because these are the people that are really going to spark the best part of the conversation today. I'm grateful for all three of them, because they're all partners to me and to Grid Catalyst, and we work in deep collaboration and thinking about how to bring these solutions to Minnesota and to the world. So I'm really, and they're all really busy. So I'm really grateful that they were able to be with us today. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their current positions, because especially in an academic setting, I love to hear a little bit about how the journey is created. So I'm going to start on that end with Bill and ask him to give that introduction.
Thanks, Nina. So I'm Bill Weber. I am the Director of Business Building within 3M Ventures. 3M Ventures is organized unusually, I think, for a large corporate venture. We've got the traditional corporate venturing side, and we've got another side that is designed to locate high-value, unmet needs in the market that 3M might be able to address and then build new businesses from scratch to do that. And we are quite focused on climate tech in a number of ways that we'll talk about a little bit later on today. But I just wanted to give you a sense, because many of you are probably interested in climate tech. Maybe you're already working in it, you're interested in working in it. There are lots of different ways to get here. I went to the Naval Academy as an undergraduate. Spent 12 years in the Marine Corps. They sent me to law school at some point in there. I spent 3 years doing criminal defense work. I went back and taught at the University of Georgia Law School. I went into private practice doing commercial litigation, was bored senseless, and went into 2 different telecommunications companies, eventually becoming the general counsel of a public company in Atlanta. And when we sold that back in 2014, I joined an early stage innovation consulting firm, stopped practicing law. Did that for about 8 years. And while I was there, I helped design the group that I'm in at 3M now. Wound up coming in-house. And as I did that at 3M, we were looking for ways to expand what we were working on. We picked climate tech, and I've been deeply involved in carbon capture projects and hydrogen generation projects for the last 2.5 years. So there's lots and lots of paths to get here. Mine's probably unusual, but I suspect that almost everybody who's really focused in climate tech today started somewhere else because it wasn't around when we were starting.
No, same story. Not even close. So yeah, there's all kind of paths. So Mark Sanders, I'm the Gemini Chair in Engineering Entrepreneurship here at the University College of Science and Engineering. My pathway here is long and winding. So the students in the room, there's so many different pathways to hear about. My interest was, my background was architectural engineering. So I got into green building back in the 90s, and I was super fascinated, all my curiosity in that direction. We got into the environment, sustainability, how to affect buildings. Can't do that without intersecting with energy. Everything intersects with energy. So I actually, in my graduate studies, started a company that did environmental remediation cleanup, especially around electric utility generation plants. Sold that company, so I was an entrepreneur, went to go work for Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, which is a Department of Energy laboratory, just commercializing new technologies, Silicon Valley, super fun. Didn't think I'd ever be working with startups like in that capacity. I always thought I'd be like an architect, engineer, building really cool environmental equipment. So that's long in the past now. Like, I'm so excited about working with people like Nina in my current role. I get to work with all kinds of clean tech startups. I get to work with students that are interested in the environment, figuring out different ways to plug in. So there's a technology piece of it. I will say, as somebody who went through engineering and technology, when I worked for a national lab and I worked with the policy groups, I figured out who actually runs the world. You know, it's the part being wet, right? So those of you that come from a different background, like, understand the role policy has and unlocks so many of the things that we can do from a technology standpoint, and we'll probably talk about some of those today. But you know, things that we're doing today aren't possible without business services.
Hi everyone, my name is Whitney Terrill, and I attended Hampton University in Virginia, which is a historically Black college and university in the Tidewater area, which is about 3.5 hours south of DC, if you've ever been there. After Hampton, I went to work at Goldman Sachs. I was doing a lot of trading operations. I really had to think through, like, what is my passion? What am I interested in? How does this connect with my community in Minnesota? And I started taking some classes at Columbia just to get myself more exposed to the environment. I was thinking about this moment that I had actually when I was in middle school. I went to Wolfridge Environmental Learning Center here in Minnesota when I was growing up. And my answer to this question, what was a time when I was really happy, was there at Wolfridge. So I kind of let my classes, I ended up earning an executive certificate in conservation and environmental sustainability. and then transitioned to work at the U.S. Green Building Council in Washington, D.C. And then later, I ended up coming back here to Minnesota, doing a lot of policy work, grassroots organizing, and eventually some of the work and engagement that I did with the Minnesota Solar Energy Industry Association in partnership with a nonprofit organization I used to work for, led to the current position that I have right now as executive director at MNSEIP, Minnesota Solar Energy Industry Project, which is really focused on diversification within the solar and energy industries. So I think for me, my pathway has been winding as well, but mostly I was asking myself, what is kind of the next problem that I want to solve? How can I best be useful? How do I prepare myself for that? So that's kind of how I got here. And I also have an interest in venture capital, which I've been exploring through my studies. So that's informing, and I've also been a part of an accelerator, so that kind of informs a lot of the skills that I'm bringing to startup MNSEIP, excuse me, is a startup. And I'm also really privileged to serve on the board of MNSEIP, the trade association.
Sometimes with these introductions, I just like have to pause for a moment and just, I'm so amazed by the journeys these folks have had, but also the work in particular, as I've been getting to know Whitney over the last year, there's always like, oh, and of course I like wearing 20 hats. So really encourage you that we're only going to have a limited amount of time in today's conversation. Please stay afterward to chat with these folks or find another time to get to know them because they are bringing a lot to the table here. I didn't capture this in my opening comments, but you heard Bill start with this as talking about climate tech. We invited you here to talk about clean tech. We might be talking about energy. These are what I like to think of as a little bit in the semantic space. We're usually talking about the same things. How do we address the problems of the world, particularly as it relates to climate, through technology, through social innovation, through different business structures that do things differently enough that we can solve some of these problems. Some of those solutions have actually been around longer than, it's not always the emerging tech of the last 6 months. It's tech that's been around but didn't have a place, as Mark said, without incentives or other changes, or the way that we bring it to the marketplace that's new. So we're using a really broad definition of, again, clean tech or climate tech in today's discussion. And you may hear that as we talk about things related to energy, carbon sequestration, how we look at smarter buildings, and how we look at solar industry. These all fall under that umbrella. So just to kind of get that grounding back into the clean tech definition. And then, of course, part of the reason the Institute on the Environment has been continuing this conversation is Minnesota's capability in this big umbrella is quite enormous. I'm always, learning something every time that I'm in a room with the folks working in this space, particularly 3M and the University of Minnesota, because the amount of discovery, research, advancement, the things that Minnesota is good at, historically, it's a lot of the things that we know and have done well with MedTech apply very well into these same spaces, and so that's a big reason why we're having this conversation. So turning it back to our panel, and I'm going to come back to Whitney first here to talk about clean tech. How does this show up in your organization? What do you have in the works right now with MNSEIP that is advancing this industry here in Minnesota?
We are hoping that the revolution, technology, clean tech revolution will happen, but with as many people from different backgrounds as possible. So the mission of MNSEIP is really focused on who's at the table. So if we were to, like, this whole time I've been sitting here, I've been just scanning the room to see who are you, who's in the room, who am I kind of guessing. I can't know everyone's background by just looking at you, but who's at the table, who's not at the table. And I especially, because of my background in grassroots organizing, I'm always especially looking for where are the Native people? Where are the Native Indigenous people who are here? So I really appreciated the land acknowledgement, and also secretly wish the University of Minnesota will give so many more scholarships to students from a Native background to really make that land acknowledgement translate to, I don't know, there's probably Native students in the room, I assume. But I would love to, increase that, because what's been so transformational and where I am as a leader right now has come from a lot of really, deep connections to, learning from Native communities. And I think that who's in the room matters. So MNSEIP, for example, we want to make sure that training programs are available that work for people who are typically underrepresented in the solar and energy industries, that want someone, if they're coming, maybe they're a returning relative or someone who's been incarcerated or experienced incarceration, that they can transition into high-paying jobs, or that Minnesotans who are in rural communities who might be afraid of having, clean tech in their communities, that they actually see the connection to a just transition, which you might be surprised is kind of like a dirty phrase sometimes to people, because they're afraid of using other parts of what they've known culturally. So I'm really interested in who's at the table. That's what MNSEIP is focused on, and trying to make sure that companies and future founders, maybe like yourself, are thinking about that on the way and having best practices and support it. So that's great.
Yeah, I'm gonna use it as a recruiting platform. So three things I'm kind of excited about working on in university. One is Technological Leadership Institute as new thrust around electrification. So bringing in together consortium partners, companies around university, around Minnesota who are doing things around electrification. And this spans different industries, and building that kind of workforce development around that. So educating not only current employees of this company, but also graduate students and hopefully undergraduate students, and kind of like learning and finding roles within kind of the education. Really paves the way for renewable energy and all kinds of things in the decarbonizing industry. The other things on campus. One is coming up, the Energy Tech University Prize, which is Department of Energy focused on any students who want to participate in a DOE sponsored activity to take energy, clean tech, and experiment, do pitching, take a product or technology that's been developed and kind of work through it, see if we can wrap a business model around it. Would be great. So that's really fun, and that's coming up shortly.
Abstracts due in February, yes.
Yes, thank you. The last is things we work on. We got two actually. One is the Center for Sustainable Polymers on campus. We're working on circular plastics. So we're kind of working with them from the. There's a lot of opportunities that come out of there. I'm focusing mostly on startup companies and thinking about circular plastics. And I walked in and I said, we take a very broad view of circular plastics. Part of that may be avoiding plastics. So you have, there's a lot of interesting things that go on around that from a circular economy perspective. So that's really exciting. The last one is we do megathons, which is cross campus. So not just college science and engineering, that's students from across campus who want to come solve. We'll do one in February again. We focus on energy, clean tech, sustainability. It's another good time to kind of dig in with with groups with different skill sets and kind of solve problems that stay around.
Mark, will you define electrification?
Electrification?
Yeah.
Making things run off electricity is probably the easiest way to think about it. You think about automobiles, which are run off gas, right? Going to EVs, electrification. You think about, I work with companies that are doing processing. Right? You think about industry and things that used to run off gas or different kinds of energy sources, and moving those to electricity. You may actually fly. And a lot of times, because a lot of these companies, there's advantages sometimes in moving electrical motors with things like that from the maintenance standpoint, but also you can transition a lot of your processes to electricity. You can then offset that with renewable energy. Is one of the big reasons we think about decarbonizing. That's one of the interim steps. Thinking about electrification as a way to get to a clean economy.
I think just making sure we're all working from the same definition with that, because there is a lot of the clean tech that's applicable in that.
There's a huge amount, yeah, and there may be other definitions.
Sure, we're only going to use yours today. Bill, there may be a thing or two happening at 3M that you could share.
There are a few things. So thinking about being Minnesota focused here, we have a partnership that's being funded by the Agriculture, USDA, with the U developing films for greenhouses. And we're also working with Bushel Boy, where if you don't know, they're just south of the cities, and they're why we get fresh, delicious tomatoes all year round here. They're not being shipped in from Chile. They're coming from 30 miles south. Greenhouse films that can make the greenhouse dramatically more efficient by doing two things. We've got a lot of low angle light in the mornings and the evenings that come in. These films can take that light and bend it. So instead of going through the greenhouse, it hits the plants. We've been able to increase production on one crop yield by about 10% in our initial trials. It's a huge amount for 1-2 month crop cycle. And so we're working with you and Bushel Boy to continue to develop those films and move them toward commercialization. We're also working extensively with the Minnesota Natural Resources Research Institute, the NRRI, which is you affiliated. And they've got interests across the natural resources of Minnesota. And where we're partnering with them is in a couple of ways. One, on hydrogen production for a green steel pilot plant that's going in somewhere up in the Iron Range. And another area we're looking at is what use can be made of mine tailings that are all over the Iron Range. Because those mine tailings have rare earth minerals in them, they have lithium in them. Can we figure out a way to get that out so that these can be used in electrification projects? It's all part of sort of the onshoring strategies where we would like to bring as much of our supply chain back into North America. So that we're not as reliant on other companies with whom we have, changing political relationships from year to year.
That's, feel like you just know, as Bill shares a couple of highlighted things, this is the tip of the iceberg moment where there's so much more there, that I would suggest Institute on Environment do a whole other session just to talk about that.
Well, but on that front, I do want to say we're also working with a number of Minnesota-based startups.
Yeah.
And the reason we're working with them, many Nina has introduced us to, is because scaling Cleantech is really hard. It's not software. We spent the last 30 years being enamored of software, which you distribute through the internet. When we're talking about Cleantech, you're making stuff. And in many instances, 3M has already expended the capital to create the production lines that can make the materials that are necessary to enable a lot of these innovations that are necessary to reduce our carbon footprint. And so we're always looking for startups who are at the stage where they're ready to think about scaling. And instead of needing to build a $30 million production line and go to venture capital to get that money, we may be able to help. And we're doing that in a number of areas, including stacks for electrolysis of water to produce hydrogen, to carbon capture materials for both direct air capture and point source capture. And so the startup community here is quite vibrant and we're engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to open up the next two questions to the panel to just opt into. So we are hitting some of the main topics that are not only important in Minnesota, but reflect the national trend and national agenda, national and globally. So as we look at the transition of these energy systems and climate technology, how do you see some of these playing out? Where do you see something so electrification, I think, is absolutely one where we can say that is a global trend. And we know the Center for Electrification Opportunity, I'm really glad I got the acronym right, is part of that. What else do you see that's a global trend that creates a Minnesota opportunity, or you see Minnesota moving on?
Nina, if you don't mind, can I just start with this one? Because I have a level policy point that
Sure.
When I was thinking about this morning, I'm kind of excited about.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it'll set this up. In the last legislative session, the legislature in Minnesota passed, that's been signed into law, a commitment to be 100% green in our energy production by 2040. That is super aggressive. And the thing that I think is wonderful about that is when you get super aggressive goals, it creates pressure on the ecosystem. It creates pressure for innovation on the ecosystem. And if we have 100% green energy, it enables the hydrogen economy. It enables us to drive more EVs because our grid is now, instead of fueling our EVs with dirty energy, we're fueling them with clean energy. It helps people across the state because it reduces emissions and pollution. And so what I'm really excited about is this pressure comes to hit that goal. Pressure creates innovation. And in the work that you all are doing in the innovation space, those kinds of policy decisions create the environment in which we can get that next generation of technical innovation that we need out of the system.
Marco? Bill just knocked it out of the park there.
Yeah, I think, we've talked about all that, it's really a great opportunity for this. And mentioned, kind of the opening was around industrial decarbonization. To me, that's like a huge opportunity. It's South specific, but it's also very broad, right? So I think about, industrial, for some people, it's how you define it, but it's always a big thing, right? I mean, industrial can include agriculture. Like Land O'Lakes is a company that they were actually, the CEO, and I forget her name, was just profiled because they were working a lot with regenerative ag, right? At an industrial scale. What does that mean, right? We certainly, agriculture is a big part of our, and I think some of the work within our, on the industry side, so think about green steel, cement, those type of things, right? So those types of industries as well, manufacturing. I think there's a huge opportunity. We're unique in our economy is pretty diverse. Meaning you have retail, you've got manufacturing, you've got transportation, you've got a lot of different things, right? So I think the kind of the common thread to me is around the need to decarbonize that industry part of it. So I think that's we need a huge opportunity.
And I think locally, something I was really excited to see at the policy level is related to like community solar gardens as an example. So we've heard like really great examples of what that looks like at the industry level. But I also am on the board of a like cooperatively owned solar company. So I'm really interested in also ways that clean tech can be applied in like different models. It's great to see, kind of the unicorns that like run and have those kind of businesses thrive, but also models that try to make community solar, which is not always like maybe the easiest way to get solar out there, but it really kind of helps people get more education and awareness about something that's usually invisible to them, and then subscribe instead of it just being, let's say, like applied to their bill as like automatic credit. So there's much more work involved there. That's likely a topic, for example, like the Energy Industry Association may not like talk about again in the future or kind of keep that going, but it was a win for the last session. That was really important, and making sure that that's available. I think on an international level, I've been a part of some civic dialogue conversations with Germans and Americans. And it's been really great to hear how our national policy to reinvest in our economy is really encouraging us, but also maybe challenging for Europeans. So that drawback into supporting our supply chain, like you're describing, is really helpful for American companies, but it's really interesting to kind of hear what does that mean to the rest of the world, or to hear from Germans, like how they're thinking about their supply chain and how that relates to China as an example. So I think being in tune with policy ideas at the global level, all the way down to where you're getting your energy, or thinking about how your own clean tech ideas, how you want to engage, whether you kind of get your skill set and then become a founder, and maybe just always have that as something driving you, is really important.
That's great. I especially am just gonna have to reflect on this education awareness about something that's invisible. I think that's, it also ties back to your just transition conversation about there's so much about the energy industry and tech that 20 years ago not only wasn't an industry, but it wasn't so visible to us, right? It's something that was delivered to us. This is just what you get. And now we talk about it more like we do with consumer electronics and things where there are things we are making choices about. There are things that we feel affected by. It's just also that you just captured a lot of that in what you're saying. And I think segues nicely into this. There's lots of opportunity. There's no shortage of opportunity. But there's both how do we make sure Minnesota isn't last, as folks in Ohio and Indiana and other places, the Voltage Valley is leaps and bounds ahead in specific things around battery development. We don't have to win in every category, but how do we do that as a region? And how do we make sure that it is not just the people who already are in the know, who already have a leg up in Minnesota, that get those opportunities? So I know that's a two-part question. I'd probably lean toward talking about how we make sure all of Minnesota gets part of that opportunity. We're going to talk about that question.
Yeah, I mean, I can just say, like, I think that inclusion is so important. I had the opportunity to go to DC for the Minnesota Farmers Union fly-in, and what I really enjoyed about that is you get to see how interconnected these conversations are. So you heard like investment, for example, coming from USDA. Maybe that's not something you would immediately think about when you think about clean tech. But those kind of investments are really meaningful, both to keep efficiency and like production, but also I think just sustaining a lot of the opportunities that are important to, like, especially rural America. If you were to hear some of the testimonials from that trip, you would hear like people describe even like USDA jobs, let alone jobs that might come from clean tech, are part of what's like grounding some rural communities, and all of the choices that our policymakers are making, all the way from like how they hire, where they're hiring, to the programs that they're administering have a huge impact on the stability of our country, really. And you could even take that conversation, if you're someone who's interested in that, and apply it to security studies, right? Like all of these things are interconnected to the stability of the country. It's pretty a big policy topic if you're interested in that. It's a great perspective. Bill, Mark?
Yeah. If we're gonna make this work, and when I say make this work, I mean, if we are going to, as a planet, get to the point where we keep temperature rise low enough that civilization as we know it can continue, it is going to take lots of partnerships. And that is partnerships between private companies like 3M, between nonprofits like Grid Catalyst and Whitney's organization, academia, and the government itself. And I read this fascinating article in the New York Times about the way Houston has managed to do a better job with homelessness than almost any other city in the United States. And the way that they went about doing that was they created an office that reported to the mayor that was designed solely to take the 100 separate nonprofits that were working on the homeless problem and begin coordinating. We have a gap here. Could you start doing this instead of that? We have too many people doing this. Could you pivot? Could you focus your efforts in this place? They created a database that they all had access to. So everyone was rowing in the same direction. And I think we are beginning to get an ecosystem like that in Minnesota, but I think it could get a lot stronger. Because as Mark mentioned, we've got manufacturing, we've got agriculture, we've got a government that cares, we've got a university that cares. If we can find a way to better organize all these different pieces, I think that is what is going to be critical, so that we're not all just working in our bubble. Oh, I care about this. Yeah, but how does that impact everything else? And could 3M help you? Or could the university help you? And if we create an environment in which we're able to ask each other for the things that we don't have, I think we get to the point where we can just be more effective with the resources that we're already spending to combat these problems.
I love the homelessness example or shelter example, because in Minnesota we do have coordinated entry. So I feel like your story is also like we have to tell our story. I feel like, you know, as someone who was from Minneapolis, I feel so proud to be from Minnesota because we have a great social services system. And so they got the attention, but we probably deserve the attention too. And also we have maybe such a good system that we maybe need to also have something that's centralized and decentralized, because everyone goes into this coordinated entry queue. So if they don't, if they're like 10,000, but they're, let's say in, I don't know, St. Louis County, they might not get a home, the person in St. Louis County might get prioritized for the housing, let's say in Minneapolis, over someone who you might see who needs it, who's on the street or something. So I think we have to also take that lesson of like innovating from others and also telling our stories, because we do a lot of really great things here in Minnesota. Yeah, that was just kind of I got really excited about that. 'Cause, like, we are like very strong in social services too, so I want to celebrate innovation we have.
Mark, anything you wanna add?
Yeah, I just appeal to at an individual. So like, having been in this like 25 years, like that, I think everything they're saying is spot on, like coordination, all that needs to happen, great storytelling. Sometimes when I'm working with people kind of new to the industry or in college, crime is a big problem, right? It's intimidating. Like, how do I solve that? It's overwhelming, and it's like, I don't even know where to go. And it's one of the most welcoming communities, most collaborative, most, just kind of easy in terms of people and from all different walks of life, but they all share a common goal and objective around climate. So I would encourage you, it doesn't, pick a spot, right? It doesn't have to be your spot for life. Just pick a spot where you want to make a difference. And like, there are so many opportunities, and sometimes the storytelling is great for our cause. Sometimes it makes people feel like the opportunity's passed, or there's, like they're doing such incredible things. And I can tell you, like having worked with startup companies that get a lot of press and stuff, like they're hanging out for dear life and they need help, right? I mean, they look like they have it together. That's the whole point of VR. But like, I'm telling you, everybody, myself included, can use help, in developing and helping, around climate and sustainability. There's lots and lots of places to plug in. If you don't know, you're exploring, come talk to me, talk to Whitney, again, everybody in this community will be like, what are you interested in? Where do you want to go? Where do you plug in? We'll have opportunities. On a personal level, if you're just looking for a place to start, like just start. Have a conversation.
I would say too, if you're interested in entrepreneurship or problem solving, and let's say if you were like a former athlete or you did anything that required like really intense focus, you will love entrepreneurship because it is like a sport. And also if you form, I'm so serious, it's so fun. And if you go to this hackathon or megathon that was described, you might find your team. Solo entrepreneurs often fail. So if you go to these really intense experiences, you'll be able to kind of see like, oh, do these people have similar worth ethic as I do? Because sometimes in these like hackathons, megathons, like you'll stay up like 24 hours, so you're not 24 hours, but you might be up like seriously like all day trying to quickly solve a problem over a weekend, and you'll end up with a concept that actually could be a unicorn. It could be solving a big problem. And the only thing you need to know is, do you have the right people by your side to push forward? Do they have the right skill set? So there's usually like two different categories. Are you all, especially if your background might be considered like a technical founder, that's really strong. You might not like to do the business. You might want to focus on the problem. So you just need to find the person you trust to run with you and like bring the idea to fruition. And you think about, is this something you have to do forever? You don't. Like some people build a unicorn and then they end up selling it, or it becomes, acquired, right, by another company who has a larger infrastructure, but you've helped solve a bigger problem. And sometimes like major universities like the U will like license the technology and it will become, you might just make money from your patent. Like you never know. But I would really encourage you to get a taste of that if you are a former athlete or a musician, anything that takes like real dedication, you'll love it if you just test out the megaphone. Megaphone.
I'm feeling your third time. You guys make it on my bank account.
I'm like, I don't think the right word. I think it's megaphone.
Megaphone, yes. Thank you.
Megaphone. Okay.
Albert.
Thank you all. I think, something thematic that I hear through all your comments so far is there's this piece about climate, clean tech. I have found people tend to be they lean towards writing themselves out of a story versus writing themselves in. And as we talk about getting to solve the problems we needed to, as well as the importance of the inclusion aspect of this. Two things have to change. We have to be willing to write ourselves into the story, and we have to change the room, right? So the room has to be a place where you feel like you can bring yourself and adapt and, you know, show up. And we have to open ourselves up to it. Okay, I attended the University of Minnesota, was at the College of Natural Resources, sorry, CPID. Just a little shout out for the old school. But you know, I took forest ecology and soils and all these, you know, I thought I was maybe gonna go to wildlife biology, and now I run a Cleantech accelerator. That is not the path I envisioned, nor was I prepared to be talking to 3M about Series A deals, you know, in a room. But it's just like, allow that to be a little maybe wider than you were really thinking about it, because I think, and Bill, you talked about this even in our prep, we need everybody, right? We need everybody in this conversation. And just maybe that path looks a little different than we expected. And as we do that work, really being out in the community, inviting that as well. So one last question from me before we turn over to some audience questions, but I am a very hopeful and optimistic person, even in the face of this major crisis. So what are folks excited about? What can you share? That could be a tech, it could be a partnership, emerging opportunity. What's got you hopeful right now? Go ahead, Bill.
All right. This is gonna get a little.
I didn't see it.
It's gonna be a little dark.
Okay, we'll go to Mark then.
No, I am excited by the fact that individuals all over the world are pressuring their governments to do more and more, because we have to have government action to get from where we are to where we need to be. And I'm sad that it is going to be continuing climate disasters and crises that continue to drive this pressure. But I have seen movement across the world much faster than I ever expected. Oh, the United States will never do this. We have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is creating opportunities that were unimaginable just 5 years ago. And so I'm quite excited about that on the policy front, because I think it's important and it's needed. And I'm just going to talk about one crazy thing that I'm excited about from a technology perspective. And that is, within my group, we've recently done a deep dive into fusion energy and what's actually happening in that space. And I think it's moving much faster than I would have imagined just 2 or 3 years ago. And if you want to do a deep dive into that, I think it's worth your time. It's exciting, and it makes me hopeful. And there are days when we read the news when it's just good to read something hopeful. It's a good space to take a look.
I think what's making me hopeful is some examples. I like big ideas. I like to, you know, go see what can I do locally, and then also where am I seeing it applied differently. So I think in terms of climate, probably one of the best ideas I've seen, or that makes me feel hopeful that it can get to everyone in the world. It was an insurance product that was basically applied to Saharan farmers. And so basically when the kind of payment that they would receive, the payout they would receive is automatic based on climate patterns. So it would limit a lot of paperwork that they would have to do. It gave them a lot of stability. These are sometimes like nomadic communities. So that's an example. I also have really enjoyed engaging with peers who have a similar commitment to climate, no matter whether they're doing grassroots organizing to trade and association work, that we all have different roles to play to push against the system, to kind of see collectively what we want. But mostly, I think engaging with students. When I went to Germany last fall, it was really cool to see like their commitment, Future for Fridays students who are really pushing and making sure that they play a role. And I'm sharing that specifically because you're in a university setting, and not that I hope you have a ton of protests by the cows out here on the lawn, but I think it's important for the commitment to go all the way from, you know, the streets to boardrooms, and that there's a lot of accountability for everyone who needs it. So we're in a very developed country. I also hope if any of you are, from nations that are figuring this out with less infrastructure, that you'll also take it back, or if you're interested in being of service to another country.
Yeah, I'm also encouraged that international, so, which I was in Cleantech around 2009, when, as Bill mentioned, we all thought the world revolved around software. Cleantech was something new and exciting. They put money into it and they realized it takes a lot longer than 6 months to return on your investment. So there were some dark days, not dark days, but some investment, helping entrepreneurs around Cleantech, or just innovations around Cleantech generally. Really probably went silent for almost 5-6 years. So I'm trying to figure the timeline, but over the last 5 years, I'd say it has grown exponentially and global. The amount of, you think about the innovations now, the policies, incentive, what's driving the people that are now attracted to work in the field because there's incentives, policy, and innovations, and there's just brilliant people and there's funding available. All of these are just lining up in a way that hasn't ever before. But this super exciting time and things that seem like impossible challenges are starting. And they, and I say every little bit, every little piece counts. There's some big pieces too, and they're all starting to get solved. I say that U.S. we have a certain perspective on it. We train the World Bank, we train all the global clean tech incubators. And what's super inspiring there is accelerating in all those places as well, but around the world, but they're solving it locally, right? Like we can't export solutions from our economy to other places. So it's like, that doesn't work. There's student ownership around climate tech, clean tech everywhere, and the investment going in there and solving the problems in a very local, regional way. Like all those things, I'm just like super excited that there's a balanced approach, a global balanced approach to solving.
Great. So now we're going to turn it over to the audience to hear some questions for you, and then we'll come back to the panel for one last closing question. So is there anything specifically you want to do?
I think you mentioned in the beginning that you're working on carbon sequestration. And I was wondering how it taken it from the atmosphere and storing it, mineralizing or whatever. And are you working on that?
Yeah.
I'm just going to repeat the question
Yeah.
for the recording. So the question is about carbon sequestration and the extent of that work that maybe is happening at 3M.
Yeah, so we are working with a company called Sponte, which is based in Vancouver, which is doing both point source. So when we talk about carbon capture at a point source, that means that an industrial facility or a power generation plant. So you're taking the flue gases that have a lot of carbon dioxide in it, you're snatching that out of the flue gases, and then you're doing something else with it. Maybe sequestering it. It's not possible to do that everywhere, but maybe reusing it, turning it into something else, sustainable aviation fuel. You can combine it, you can crack the CO2 molecule, you can put some hydrogen in the mix under the right conditions, and you can wind up with aviation fuel. So we are working with them to produce the materials that go into their filter packs, which are the things that the air passes through, that they can pull the CO2 out of just the atmosphere around us, then to be sequestered. And so the way that's done, in general, there are other ways to do it. You mentioned mineralization as well. It's very easy to turn CO2, react it with some different things and turn it into limestone or calcium carbonates or other pretty stable materials. But you can also compress it and pump it into, in the United States, we call them Class 6 wells. They have to be certified. It's not an easy process to get them certified, that the CO2, once you put it underground, is not going to come back out. And the DOE recently announced several hubs, one in Louisiana. These are in areas where the geology is right for sequestration, and another in Wyoming. And the companies that capture tend to be different than the companies that do the sequestration. And so they have a lot of partnerships in there. I'm going to build this direct air capture hub that's going to capture, 10,000 tons a year or 1,000,000 tons a year. We need to get up to a couple of gigatons a year. So that's a couple of billion tons a year. That's what we do need to get to. But they're partnering with the companies who do the compression and then get it underground.
Thanks for organizing this meeting, to be here. I wanted to add a topic to the answer to your question about what specifically can or should be done in Minnesota, and what distinguishes Minnesota is in the country. Certainly, climate is one thing, and the winters are one thing, right? And the energy that we need for heating, and it's all for buildings and homes. Virtually all comes from natural gas or from other fossil fuels, right? And there's this whole area of heat pumps that's gotten a lot of attention now, and some here as well, and there are some companies here, and there are organizations that are trying to drive that. But I feel like we don't hear enough about that, and compared especially to, say, Europe and places like Finland or other Northern European places which have similar climate challenges, who are putting these large-scale heat pump systems even for district heating. So I was wondering what your thoughts were about that area as something that could be more focused. I'm thinking about what we're doing with EVs and providing incentives to consumers. Well, if we were to provide incentives for heat pumps, because there is a capital cost associated with
For sure.
operation costs.
So I'll be quick. So I agree with district heating. I'm lucky enough to live in downtown St. Paul, where we have one of the few district heating systems in the United States. So my building is heated and cooled from a central plant that uses steam, and the system is really cool. You can go tour it. It's quite interesting.
So probably natural gas, right?
No.
No.
Biomass.
Yeah, biomass. So there's still CO2 coming out, but it is biomass. But we've also connected them with a company in Finland called Polar Night, which is super interesting. They have what they call a sand battery, and they heat up a giant mound of sand using renewable energy, and then you pull the heat out for district heating systems. So that is going on. And the IRA does include incentives for heat pumps. If you change your heating system over to heat pumps, I don't know what the numbers are, but there are federal incentives today. But I agree with you that focusing on cold climate solutions is something that is good for Minnesota. And I know we've got a vibrant partnership with Finland in a number of these areas.
I'll just weigh in on this really quickly because I come from the thermal background, having worked at that plant for 13 years, and in the district energy space. So I on the heat pump side, the state of Minnesota is still trying to figure out its own incentive profile coming out of the IRA. So there were things passed in last year's legislature that they're expecting next year. There's also a Minnesota Air Source Heat Pump Collaborative run from the Center for Energy and Environment. I recognize that those of us who are in that very wonky space tend to be in the know, and that doesn't mean it gets out to the public. There are also some challenges with the heat pump incentive because it is a refundable IRA tax incentive. So for those who don't have enough tax burden, they in the lower income brackets don't realize some of those same incentives. I do know that some of the things they're trying to do with the Minnesota Climate Innovation Finance Authority are trying to address some of those gaps and look at how to deploy some of that funding to folks who cannot realize some of those tax incentives. So I think we will see a lot more, especially on heat pumps in the next year. There's also a new initiative from Fresh Energy that I can't remember the name of that is all about basically renewable heat or decarbonized heat solutions that just kicked off like 2 weeks ago. So I think really in 2024, we're gonna hear a lot more about that profile. So, some hands over here. Go ahead.
You guys mentioned a couple times that there used to be an understanding that like software is really important in all of this. You said specifically back in 2009, I was like a kid, so kind of behind on the history of the kind of the transition from that to where we're at now. And I was wondering if you kind of reiterate that transition, changing understanding.
Sure, so I don't want to make it, software is still important. Maybe consider like artificial intelligence now, even from an energy perspective. So Google has DeepMind as an example of AI. platform, and they, I work with people that used to do like that. The data warehouse, the things in the, you know, it just burns so much energy. And Google did nothing wrong, but they were already very, very efficient. And they did nothing but release their AI onto their platform, and they reduced energy by 30%. Right? So huge potential, you know, around. I would say that this shift happened where like software was just apps, particular software, like, it was just kind of like low hanging fruit, easy to develop. From an investment standpoint, it would be, if you're an investor, you get a pretty good return in very short time. Right. So investing in things that take like chemistry or engineering or sciences, stuff like that, take much longer. You know, and the appetite's very good. So that what we've ended up with are all kind of, we have that much more diverse in terms of what they invest in. I wouldn't say we invest in diverse people, but what they invest in is certainly is more diverse. So you get people that now that just specialize in AI and robotics and eventually can't be able to do software. All important. It was just important to make sure that we have the breadth of solutions, and people understand there's breadth of solutions.
But I will say that both hard tech and software are critically important to meet our climate goals. And there's software all over any grid scale solar farm that is doing all kinds of things. Software has made our cars dramatically more efficient. The software is making manufacturing processes dramatically more efficient. And if we get back to Minnesota, if we're going to get to 100% clean energy by 2040, we need, in addition to just creating this, we need to be using less electrons every day so that the build out of the green energy becomes smaller. And software is one of the keys to us needing less electrons going forward. So neither of us meant to minimize its importance going forward. It's just scaling challenges are different.
Thank you, because I was like interested in something.
We need to stand both in this situation,
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, we could probably take one more. I'm gonna go to the back.
Yes. In your discussion, you were saying that it requires people from disparate backgrounds and lots of perspectives, and that the community is very open. With that in mind, what role do you see K-12 education playing in the climate crisis and solving for that? And what recommendations do you make for education professionals and communities they serve?
I'm gonna repeat that just because it's from the back of the room, and abbreviate a bit, but just what's the role for K through 12 education and that part of our education system from the perspective of panel?
I think there's a lot of different ways that people will decide on their post-secondary plans. So making sure that students, in Minnesota, we have such a strong like education system, public, private, charter, that all students are really exposed to different career opportunities that they're interested in, especially because a lot of, whether it's like entrepreneurship, or clean tech jobs, like there's a lot of barriers to students finding efficacy in the education system, that they can actually become an engineer, that they can, and also the barriers that come with that. I mentioned in the beginning that I graduated from HBCU. If you can imagine, like almost all of the judges, all of the engineers from a background who are African American come through HBCUs, like that kind of partnership, making sure that students in K through 12 backgrounds either go to a predominant institution that's going to support them, or that they find themselves in programs that really believe in them. I think a lot of it is mental, you know, too, making sure that students really can see themselves, because they might not be exposed to professionals who look like them on their journey. So I think that's really important. And then also making sure that the technology is within the school system. So the school that I spend a lot of time at is North Community High School, and they have a solar system. I intentionally subscribed to that solar array because I wanted to be able to tell my relatives there's a solar array on the high school. The kids will be able, the students, scholars will be able to be exposed to that. They have partnerships with so all of those, I think schools have to seek out partnerships where their budgets may not allow students to be prepared for the future too. So I'll stop.
That's great. you know, whatever the topic's been over the years, whether it's how do we get people into clean tech, how do we get more women in STEM, how, like, you know, a group always kind of come back to, we need to catch them at elementary school, like K through 12, it's just like critical, like that we actually, I think they've done an absolutely wonderful job of putting like sustainability there, right? But like, I think, and they're working on STEM, so it's like, it's certainly not solved, but I think I see at least a recognition that's where you actually have to capture hearts and minds, because it's too late. I mean, like, there's certainly tons of people coming in, and the college is like, interested in kind of environment and sustainability, but like how you plug into those things is still an unknown. I think moving that more and kind of making sure it's all inclusive, right? Making sure all the everybody can participate. You know, that's an option.
So Melissa is standing, so I know we have.
Well, I think it's a great note to end on. And I want to thank you all so much for being part of this conversation, and for all of you being part of the conversation and being part of the People on Planet event today. If you're interested in finding out more about the Institute on the Environment, please check out our website at environment.umn.edu. And we look forward to hosting you at another People on Planet in the future.